She called it curiosity, but when our eyes met, we both knew it was becoming something we could never walk away from. I had been to my friend's house 100 times before, but that evening felt different. Maybe it was the soft golden light spilling in through the living room curtains, or maybe it was the way his mom looked up when I walked in, her dark eyes meeting mine for just a second longer than usual. She was 42, graceful in the kind of way that didn't demand attention but quietly held it anyway. Her presence filled the room without her having to say a word. She wore a simple pale blouse tucked into soft jeans, her hair loosely tied back, a few strands falling around her face as though they'd been too stubborn to tame. There was nothing flashy about her, no heavy makeup, no staged perfection, just an ease about her that made me want to stay in the doorway a little longer, watching. She greeted me with the same warmth she always had, asking about classes, work, the usual small talk. But I noticed things I had never let myself notice before. The way her voice carried a calm steadiness, like a song hummed under breath. The way her laugh came softly, almost shy, yet it left me wanting to hear it again. I sat on the couch waiting for my friend to come downstairs, but I couldn't stop my gaze from drifting toward the kitchen where she moved. There was nothing extraordinary about what she was doing, rinsing dishes, drying her hands with a towel, and yet, I caught myself memorizing every detail. The rhythm of her movements, the gentle hum she made as though she wasn't aware anyone was listening. For the first time, I felt something stir in me, something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't bold, it wasn't reckless, it was quieter than that. A curiosity. An awareness. My pulse quickened at the realization, and I tried to shake it off. She was my friend's mom. She was older, wiser, living a life I could only observe from the outside. But the human heart doesn't ask for permission to notice. When she walked back into the room, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel, her eyes caught mine again. It wasn't intentional, but neither of us looked away immediately. A pause, subtle but loaded, hung in the air. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, as if to break the silence, and smiled. That was all it was. A glance. A smile. A moment that should have meant nothing. But I knew, deep down, it had planted something I couldn't ignore. A few days later, I found myself at my friend's house again. He had run out to grab something from the store, leaving me alone in the living room with his mom. Normally, I would have passed the time scrolling on my phone, but that evening felt too quiet to ignore. She was seated across from me, a book resting loosely in her hands, though I noticed she wasn't really reading. Her eyes lifted when she sensed my glance, and she gave a small smile. "You're awfully patient," she said, setting the book aside. "Most people your age wouldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes." Her tone was playful, teasing, but gentle. I chuckled, leaning back against the couch. Maybe I'm not like most people my age. That earned me a curious look, the kind that seemed to weigh my words before deciding whether they carried truth. "That's what I've noticed," she said softly. "You listen. You don't just wait for your turn to speak." The compliment caught me off guard. I wasn't used to someone noticing me like that. She asked about my studies, my plans after graduation, and before I realized it, I was talking freely. Not just surface talk, but deeper things, my dreams, my doubts, the pressure I felt at times. She didn't brush my words aside or give half-hearted answers. She listened with her full attention, and every now and then, she'd tilt her head, like she was memorizing me the way I had started to memorize her. When she laughed at one of my clumsy jokes, I felt warmth spread through me. It wasn't the laughter itself, it was the softness in her eyes afterward, the way her hand lingered near her lips as if she was holding back something else she wanted to say. At one point, I asked about her own dreams, and she hesitated before answering. "Dreams change," she murmured, looking toward the window. "When you're young, you think you'll do everything. But life teaches you to choose." There was a faint sadness in her voice, the kind that hinted at stories she wouldn't share yet. I wanted to ask more, to pull those hidden stories out, but I stayed quiet. Sometimes silence feels more intimate than words. When my friend finally returned, it felt like a spell had been broken. She smiled politely, picked up her book again, and for anyone else, it might have seemed like nothing had passed between us. But as I stood, I caught her eyes one more time, a glance that lingered just a second longer than it should have. And I knew this was more than small talk. It was a beginning. It happened so simply, so quietly, that at first I wondered if I'd imagined it. I was in the kitchen, helping her set the table while my friend was upstairs. She handed me plates, one by one, her movements graceful in their ordinariness. I reached for a glass at the same time she did, and our hands brushed. It should have been nothing, a clumsy accident, the kind you laugh off. But I didn't laugh. Neither did she. Her skin was warm, softer than I expected. Instead of pulling away immediately, she let the touch linger for a fraction of a second too long. Just long enough for me to notice. Just long enough for my heart to start pounding in my chest. She drew her hand back finally, clearing her throat as though the air between us had thickened. "Sorry," she murmured, a faint smile tugging at her lips, though her eyes told a different story. There was no real apology in them. If anything, there was acknowledgement. A silent yes, I felt it too. I placed the glass down carefully, trying to steady myself. I had touched girls my own age before, casual brushes of hands, a hug here or there. But this felt different. It wasn't playful or fleeting. It was deliberate in its hesitation, as though some invisible line had been crossed and neither of us wanted to admit it out loud. The rest of the evening passed in fragments. I remember her leaning just a little closer when she spoke, her hand brushing the counter near mine as though testing invisible boundaries. I remember her laughter, lighter, less guarded, almost nervous. Every glance felt heavier, weighted with something unsaid. At one point, while pouring tea, she said softly, "This is just curiosity, you know." Her tone was careful, almost testing, but her eyes betrayed her. They held a flicker of something she was trying to suppress. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that it was more than that already. But I only smiled, letting the words hang between us. Inside, though, my thoughts burned. If this is curiosity, then why does it feel like need? When my friend finally joined us, she shifted back into her usual self, polite, composed, untouchable. But I couldn't forget that moment in the kitchen. That brief, electric touch had changed everything. And deep down, I knew she couldn't forget it either. After that evening in the kitchen, something unspoken lingered between us. It wasn't obvious, not the kind of thing anyone else would notice, but for me, every small detail had taken on new meaning. The way she adjusted her blouse when I walked into the room, smoothing the fabric as though aware of my eyes. The way her voice softened when she spoke to me, low and careful, different from the tone she used with anyone else. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was reading into things I wanted to believe. But then came the night on the porch. It was late, the kind of evening when the sky had already sunk into deep indigo, and the only light came from the dim bulb above the back door. My friend had gone out with some other friends, leaving me to wait. She asked if I wanted to sit outside with her, and I followed without hesitation. The porch was quiet, framed by the faint chirping of crickets and the smell of cut grass still lingering from the afternoon. She sat down first, folding her arms lightly across her chest, and I lowered myself into the chair beside her. The space between us was small, too small, really, and our shoulders brushed when I leaned back. Normally, she might have shifted away, a polite adjustment to re-establish space. But she didn't. She stayed exactly where she was, her shoulder warm against mine. That single choice sent a rush through me, my pulse quickening. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was heavy, like the air itself carried meaning. Finally, her voice broke through, quiet and almost fragile. "Life can be lonely sometimes." She exhaled softly, her gaze fixed on the dark yard ahead of us. "You spend years taking care of everyone else, and you forget what it feels like to be seen. Her words pierced deeper than I expected. She wasn't just talking about herself. She was confessing something, letting me glimpse a truth she probably didn't share with anyone else. I turned toward her, searching her face, and in the dim porch light, I saw it, the flicker of vulnerability she tried to hide behind her calm expression. I wanted to reach for her hand, to say something comforting, but I held back. The silence between us was enough. And in that silence, I realized something. This wasn't curiosity anymore. It was gravity. Something pulling us closer, no matter how much we tried to resist. The night it happened, the house was quiet, the kind of quiet where every creak of the floorboards and shift of breath seemed amplified. My friend had gone to bed early, and I was left downstairs with her, the faint glow of a lamp casting the living room in warm amber light. She was seated on the edge of the sofa, one leg crossed over the other, her posture composed but her eyes restless, as though she was fighting a storm inside. I sat across from her, my elbows on my knees, pretending to watch the muted television. But the truth was, I couldn't take my eyes off her. The way her fingers tapped lightly against her arm, the way her lips parted as if she had something to say but kept swallowing it back. Finally, she broke the silence. Her voice was low, steady, yet edged with hesitation. This, whatever this is, it can't mean anything. It's just curiosity. She said it almost like a question, though the words were framed as a statement. My chest tightened, not with disappointment but with recognition. She was trying to draw a boundary, but her tone betrayed her. This wasn't just curiosity. Not for her. Not for me. I leaned back slowly, letting the moment stretch before I spoke. Then let's get addicted. The words slipped out, softer than I intended, but they carried all the weight I felt. I didn't mean recklessness or destruction. I meant the way her presence was already becoming something I craved, the way I couldn't stop noticing her, couldn't stop wanting to be the one who made her feel seen. Her eyes widened slightly, as though she hadn't expected me to answer like that. A faint smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, but it wasn't playful, it was conflicted. Vulnerable. She looked down at her hands, then back at me, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was different this time. Not heavy with tension, but alive with something new, an understanding. We weren't declaring anything, weren't rushing into the danger of naming what we felt. But we were acknowledging it. Agreeing, silently, that this connection mattered. She didn't reach for me. I didn't move closer. Instead, we just sat there, eyes locked in a gaze that lingered longer than any touch could have. And in that wordless exchange, we both knew, a line had been crossed, and there was no going back. After that night, nothing between us looked different on the surface, yet everything felt changed. We didn't speak of what was said, but the air carried a charge now, subtle yet undeniable, as if every glance and every small movement was laced with meaning. The next afternoon, I offered to help her carry in groceries from the car. It was ordinary, something I'd done before. But when she handed me a heavy bag, her fingers rested lightly on my forearm a moment longer than necessary, steadying herself. It wasn't an accident. The warmth of her touch sank into my skin, and I could feel my pulse thrum beneath it. Her eyes flickered up to mine, then quickly away, as though she'd revealed too much. Later, in the kitchen, she brushed a stray lock of hair from her face. Without thinking, I reached forward and tucked it gently behind her ear. My fingertips grazed her skin, feather-light, and for a second, the world seemed to still. She froze, not pulling away, her breath catching ever so slightly. Then she looked at me, not with shock, not with disapproval, but with something far more dangerous. Permission. It became our language. The small touches. The unspoken signals. A brush of her hand when she passed me a cup. The way her shoulder would linger against mine when we sat side by side. The way she leaned in a fraction closer than necessary when she asked a question. Each gesture was innocent enough to deny, yet heavy enough to keep us both awake at night replaying them. One evening, while drying dishes, our hands bumped again. This time, she didn't move. She let my hand stay there, pressed against hers beneath the cool porcelain. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady and searching. A heartbeat stretched into 2, into 3. Then, almost reluctantly, she pulled her hand back, her lips parting as though she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to. "We shouldn't," she whispered, more to herself than to me. But the way her voice faltered, the way her eyes lingered, told me she didn't believe her own words. That night, lying awake, I realized something with startling clarity: we weren't resisting anymore. We were orbiting each other, circling closer with every moment, and it was only a matter of time before gravity pulled us into something neither of us could deny. And though it scared me, I didn't want to resist it either. It was late when it finally happened. The house was still, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the silence. My friend had already gone upstairs, leaving me and her alone in the living room again. A lamp glowed softly in the corner, spilling warm light across her face as she sat curled on the sofa, her arms loosely around her knees. I sat beside her, careful not to intrude, but close enough to feel the quiet pull that had been growing between us for weeks. She looked tired, not in a way that spoke of sleepless nights, but in the way a soul looks when it has carried too much for too long. "You make it hard to pretend," she whispered suddenly, her voice fragile in the silence. My chest tightened. "Pretend what?" "That this doesn't mean anything." She turned her head, and in the glow of the lamp, I saw the vulnerability she usually kept hidden. "Curiosity doesn't keep me awake at night. Curiosity doesn't make me wait for the sound of your voice." Her eyes flickered to mine, then down again, as if she'd confessed too much. I didn't answer right away. Words felt clumsy in a moment like this. So instead, I moved closer, just enough that our knees brushed. Slowly, carefully, I reached out, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Her breath trembled as I slipped an arm around her waist, gently drawing her against me. She let herself come forward, her body softening as her arms slid around me. Her cheek rested lightly against my chest, and for the first time, I felt the quiet rhythm of her heartbeat against mine. It wasn't rushed or frantic. It was steady. Real. We stayed like that for a long time, saying nothing. My hand moved slowly along her back, not in hunger, but in comfort, the kind of touch that says, "You're safe here." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of the moment sink in, knowing it wasn't about stolen thrills or reckless danger. It was about two people finding something they hadn't even known they were searching for. Finally, she spoke, her voice muffled against me. Maybe curiosity was just the excuse. A smile tugged at my lips. I tilted my head down, letting my chin rest lightly against her hair. "Then I'm glad we stopped pretending." In that quiet embrace, the world outside ceased to exist. There was no forbidden, no fear, no labels, just the simple truth of connection. And in her arms, I knew, this was no addiction, no passing intrigue. This was something far deeper. Something we would carry with us, long after the silence of that night.